This video will cover the topic of finding the volume of composite shapes. Be sure the date and topic are at the top of your page. The essential question for this video will be, how do we find the volume of non-prism or composite shapes? So we have worked with regular prisms, we've worked with triangular prisms, and we've worked with cylinders, but there are certainly some shapes that are made up of kind of multiple different prisms together. Like this house, for example, right? If we wanted to find the volume or the space that was inside this house, we might see it as a combination of a triangular prism and a rectangular prism and find the volume of both and then add them together, right? You can find the total volume using that strategy. So we're going to look at a few examples of doing just that. So this here is a composite shape, right? I can tell that this is made up of pretty much two rectangular prisms. If I cut this here, right, I'll see that I have a prism here, we'll call this A, and I have a prism here, and we'll call this B, right? They're both rectangular prisms. So I'm going to take a moment and find the volume of each of those parts, and then put them together to find our total volume. And I'll start with prism A. So I need to see, this is a rectangular prism, so I need to find the area of the base. And I'm actually just going to shade this in because I know the top and bottom are the same. So this is the top, but I'm going to kind of use it as the base as well. So I need to find the area of that base first and then multiply it by the height. And I can tell right away that the base here has a length of 12 and a kind of height of 6, right? If I'm just looking at that part. So I'm going to do that part first. And then I would need to multiply that by the height to figure out my total. But I'm going to just mark my height here as 4. Which means that for my prism A, the volume of just that section is 288 cubic units, right? But I'm not done, right? That was just prism A. Which means I can now turn my attention to prism B. And once again, I'm looking for that kind of total surface base that I can use to then multiply by my height. And I need to see what values I have here. So I know that this goes back the same as this, which is the same as what would be here and here. So this is 6 on this side. The entire length here was 18, but 12 was used up already, which means this section here, even though it might not look it, right, it might look a little skewed here or distorted, this is also 6. Because 18 minus the 12 that have already been used would leave us with 6. So I'm going to use that to figure out the whole surface of the bottom and then multiply that by our height. And when I do that calculation, I see that the volume of the second section, B, is 504. So that means, of course, that my total volume would be A plus B. So I'm just going to add this up. And the total of this entire space would be 792 cubic units, right? This is cubes inside, so we use that little notation of cube or 3 in the corner. The same process will be true, for a shape such as this one. And this time I'm looking at it and I can see that there is a rectangular prism here, I'll call that A. And then I see a triangular prism here. So those are the two sections that I'm working on. And I'm going to work under the assumption that this is sort of on its side. Prisms are named for the faces that are parallel. So even though these are on their side, these are what we're going to refer to as the base, right? So those triangles will be our big B. And I'm going to find the prism of, or the volume of both prisms, of course, but I would encourage you to try it yourself first and then pause the video, try it, and then check in and see if we get the same thing, just so you can see if you're on the right track. So when I did prism A, I'm looking again at this as sort of my base here. So this is 13 by 13, because that's 13, so this is as well. So that's this blue section here. And then I'm going to multiply it by the height of 30. And I know it's a little weird because it looks like the height is in a different spot, but I'm just pretending this has been rotated down on its side. And when I do all that, I find the volume of this first section, the rectangular space, of 5,000, it's a lot, whopping 5,070 inches cubed. And then I'll turn my attention now to my prism B, which is a triangular prism. And the volume is still the same. It's still my big B times H. The only difference is now this is a triangle. So when I find my area of my base, I have to use my triangular formula. And when I'm looking at my triangle, I see that I have a 9 by 13 triangle. So that would be how I would start to find the area of my base. But it's a triangle, so I divide by 2. And then the height here is still 30. So that's going to be my height here as well. So I'm just going to punch those in and calculate that out. And in doing so, I find that the area of just the triangle is 58 and 2/10. And then I have to multiply that by all the 30 layers. So the volume of that section is 1,755 cubic inches. Which means if I put these back together again, the grand total here would be 6,825 inches cubed. And that's an 8 here, if you can't tell. So hopefully you tried that on your own and received the same answer or got the same answer. Let's do one more together. Now this image is a little blurry, but hopefully you can tell that we still have two sections. It's kind of a funny shape. We have this section here, we'll call this A, that's our rectangular prism. And then I have a cylinder as my second section here. So we're going to find the volume of both the rectangular prism and the cylinder. And again, I encourage you to try to kind of work these out on your own first, but I do know that I'm going to be using that volume of finding the whole base first times the height for each of these. All right, so for prism A, of course, I have a base of 5 by 3, and then the height here is 7. Pretty straightforward on that one. The second prism, however, is a cylinder, so we have to think a little bit maybe more mindfully about that, right? So this time we have to find the area of the circle here before we multiply by our area here. And I know, again, it looks like it's sideways, but this is named a cylinder because of the circle base, and so we need to find the area of that circle first. So I'm just going to go through this extra step of kind of writing that all out. So we're doing pi r squared for the circle portion first, and then we'll multiply this by the height. And we're just going to use 3.14 for pi. But of course, there's one more thing to think about, and that is that 5 inches is our diameter. So our radius squared is going to be 2.5 squared. And then, of course, once we find all that, we'll multiply it by our 4 layers. So again, I'm going to kind of plug some stuff in first. Feel free to pause and figure out if we get the same thing as each other after I finish mine and you finish yours. But just make sure when you're doing that square, that 2.5 squared is not 5, right? It's 2.5 times itself. And then, of course, once you have those two sections, we just stick them back together to combine for the entire shape. And I got a grand total of 183.5 cubic inches. So I'm going to leave you with one more to try on your own. And this one we'll start with actually kind of a scenario here. So we know that we want to build a step, and we're trying to see how much space is inside the step for this group. So I'm going to give a model, right? You can kind of hold on here and I'll draw this, or I'll insert a model here for you. And so your task is, of course, to figure out the total volume here, right, of this, total volume of this space. And be mindful of the fact, right, that we have kind of two prisms here. If I were you, I would cut this into two sections. You can choose if you want to cut it this way or cut it in a different direction. But you're going to have to need to find the different dimensions that are missing, right? So there's some things missing here and maybe here, so kind of be aware of that. But find the volume of your two different sections and then combine it, and let's see if we get the same thing when we meet in class. And remember that the essential question for the video was how to find the volume of these composite shapes. So this is a great chance for you to practice that on your own. Make sure you bring the answer to this question and any questions you might have to ask to class, and we'll practice this more together.